Hey guys, I'm sorry that the live feed was acting up on me today. Not even sure what's going on. I kept trying to get on the live feed, and it was telling me that I just couldn't start the live feed. I don't know why. And it's not well, it has nothing to do with the software that I was going to use today. There was a software that I was going to implement some phone calls where you could call in, but for whatever reason, I didn't take the extra steps, and I didn't go in and I didn't set up whatever encoder that YouTube needs. So today, I know I sold it as like, call me up. We're gonna do all these things with the live feed. So I apologize if I led you down the wrong path. It's just I just don't get what happened here. So let me just move a couple things around because I had to move my camera around. With everything that was going on. So welcome to today's live feed. I really appreciate it. If you would do me a favor and share this live feed out with your network on your social media networks, that would be really, really great. Now, when it comes down to that software, I do plan on using that software. It's actually called Ecamm, and it's only for Mac. And last night I spent about I would say a good 2.5 hours really setting everything up in Ecamm, and it actually works really great. And it would give me an opportunity to do a little more screen share time with all of you guys. So that would, if you had questions about tech or editing, the editing process, I would be able to kind of walk you through a little bit of that. Today, we won't be able to do that, unfortunately, just because of the situation where I'm over here dealing with I'm dealing with technical difficulties, and that's just kind of how it goes with live podcasting, live radio. So if you would just do me a favor and give me a quick second, because I do need to let me see here. I do need to share this out and reshare it out onto my LinkedIn page. So share it out on your LinkedIn. Make sure you like this out, like this particular feed, and I will go ahead and share that out on LinkedIn because I shared it. And then, of course, nothing happened. Everyone's going to be going to this live feed, and it's just not going to be something that's going to exist. So I have to edit the post and come in and actually put the real URL in. So let me see. Let me see. There we go with that. And I didn't know that there was character limits on LinkedIn. So there we go. So how's everyone doing today? It's so good to see you. I see Mark Crew is here from Wisconsin. So let me know where you are chatting from today. And I'm happy to, answer your, say hello and then answer your questions. So today, I guess it's going to be a little bit more of a rough, live stream, just because I had all these big plans, and so I'm still here to answer your questions no matter what, and I'm still here to answer whatever I can with your podcast. We may make today's live feed a little bit more short. We may make it a little bit longer. I don't know. It all depends. Now, if you want to ask a question, do me a favor, and there's a link down in the description of this particular video that I went ahead and put, and you could submit your questions there. Now, you can also submit them here in the live chat on the right-hand side, and I'll be able to answer them there for you as well. So just kind of bear with me today. There's just been a lot of technical difficulties. I started even a half an hour ago, just trying to get this stuff up and running. So hopefully by next week, I'll be able to do that. So let's go ahead and recap real quick what has been going on, not only with me, but also with what content that I've been creating. Well, number one, I have not been able to create content for 2 weeks. I mean, I have been able to create content for 2 weeks, but it has been a little bit difficult because just as people who are living in the northern part of the United States during winter, and they have to deal with the brutal winters, and this doesn't have to be United States. This could be, in Europe and England, wherever. The last 2 weeks, I have been dealing with the opposite weather. I've been dealing with 117 degree heat, and believe it or not, the air conditioning went out in my place. And so, to make a long story short, the air conditioning went out on July 4th. So it went out the day after I did my last live feed, and I was unable to really work in this room. Like I've told you before, I live in a condo unit that has block walls, and it gets really hot. So when the sun is bearing down 117 degrees on the block walls, it tends to heat things up like a hot plate. So my entire condo unit was like 87 degrees for the past 2 weeks, and I have a portable AC unit, and that has been keeping me cool. In fact, it's not even in the room right now. And so I was like, oh my God, so it was just difficult. So anyway, had an AC guy come out on July 4th. He ended up looking at the AC unit, said, oh man, we need to replace the motors in this. And the motors probably haven't been replaced since this place was built back in the 1960s. So he went back, was going to come back on the following Tuesday, came back on the following Wednesday, actually, took down everything, got the new motors. And he said, I have to actually clean off the coils. And so he cleaned off the coils, and he was going to clean off the coils. He's like, I got to come back. And he said, so I'm going to give you a deal. I'm going to you have to pay for the two blowers that you have to replace, which is $300 each, which is $600. He goes, and I'll throw on my normal, my service fee or my labor fee, which is $200. So there's $800 just like right out the door. And then he tells me that I have to clean the coils, which is another $200 for the coil cleaner. At the end of the day, it was $1,000. And he discovered that there was mold on the coils, and who knows how long it has been there. So that is what I've been dealing with. That is why I have not been able to create content in the last couple of weeks. I've been doing my best to create content for all of you guys. So thank you guys for being patient with me. And I haven't sent out email newsletters to you guys in the last couple of weeks, just because of that situation that has had me really kind of stifled in terms of like where can I go and what can I do. And working out of like coffee shops is great, but you can only work out of coffee shops so much, and you just don't want to spend the money because you're just spending money when you're there. So that is what has been going on. So thank you guys so much for your patience with me, and I really appreciate it. So today we're going to be talking about how to become a better podcast host. Now, this is going to be very loose for you guys. As I mentioned earlier, I was planning on doing it all on a different software, but unfortunately, that's not going to happen. We'll do it again on another piece of software. So, on another live feed. So just as I'm learning this new software, it's just like starting your own podcast. But one of the topics that comes up quite a bit inside of my YouTube channel is, and in fact, it's one of the top searched terms inside of YouTube itself, is how to become a great podcast host. And this is something that I don't know if it's that important for people who are trying to become a podcaster. I've been in radio for over 19, 20 years, and I am just used to it. So you realize that when you do things, you get used to how you do them. I was never confident in front of the microphone before radio. I was always very shy in front of the microphone, and it got very difficult for me to express who I was in front of the microphone. So what I want to share with you today are very simple tips. And if anything, they're really more assurances than anything else of how to become a great podcast host. Maybe you have particularly some particular techniques and tricks that you use to become a great podcast host. But I will share with you the tips and tricks that I've used over the last 20 years, and they will be very, very basic. And it should not take that. It should not be that difficult for people when it comes down to honing their skills as a podcast host. Doing this type of format inside of something like YouTube is very difficult because you're talking at length. And the radio that I do at the radio station, I'm talking in like 15, 30-second spurts. So I already have a script that is ready to go. It's already on a piece of paper. It's already something that is pre-written, and I just have to repeat it over and over and over. Now, a lot of these particular tips and tricks will, as far as like reading something over and over and over, these will play really well inside of your podcast. And I will get to that when it comes down to the promotion of it all. So let me say hi to a couple people who are in the live feed right now. I see Steve Worrell. I don't know if you guys are still in here. I saw some people popping in and popping out, but if you're here, I will say hi to you. So I see Bearberg is here. I also see Also, George is here. Freddie Real, Hockey Poo. It's good to see you here as well. And Bearberg saying that's why you use link shorteners. You can edit a long URL without affecting the short URL. I'm not sure if it was something that had to deal with the URL. I don't think it was. This was something that was on the YouTube watch page, or actually the broadcast page when I was trying to go. It kept saying to me that live streaming is not available, and I just was like, the live streaming is available. I know it's available. I don't know what's going on. So I don't know if that's what you were talking about. So I appreciate it. And I want to thank Nessie Embo for doing the very first super chat right now on YouTube, throwing $5 my way because of the content that I am creating for all of you guys. She's there. She's learning, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to help her out. So I want to thank you. You are my podcast guru, is what she says. So I want to thank you. So you guys are more than welcome to join in on the super chat down below. There is a little $ button that is next to the emoji button on YouTube, and you can go ahead and hit that, and you can contribute to this channel. Without contributions like that, this channel does not exist. It definitely does help out a lot, so I really appreciate it. I see Shannon is here, and Shannon, Shannon, I don't know how to say your name great, but you are in Arizona, so thank you so much for joining. I appreciate it. And I see Freddie Real, but thank you so much for the super chat of $30. I really appreciate that very much, my friend. Your contributions help out so much, so thank you so much for doing that. There is no outdoing anyone here on super chat, but thank you very much. All right, so let's just jump in real quick. I'm going to go into the content, then I'm going to answer your questions for you. Now, if you have questions, there's a link down below that will help you ask the question in a form, and then I will get to that after this first part of the presentation. All right. So here we go. I'm going to talk about becoming a better podcast host. So number one, the first thing that we have to do when we think about becoming a better podcast host is that you have to really focus on the preparation. This is the biggest thing that I think most podcasters do not focus on, is the preparation. Now, when I'm talking about preparation, I am talking about the prep. Let's say if you are interviewing someone on your particular podcast, and preparation really is the key behind you becoming a better podcaster over time. Okay. This is something where I think most podcasters say, oh, I'm just going to go live and I'm going to just take the conversation wherever it goes, and whatever guest or host that I have, or guest that I have on my podcast, we'll just kind of figure out where we go with the conversation. What I'm telling podcasters all of the time, whether I'm here in Phoenix and telling them and consulting them on a different basis, I'm telling them you really should be focusing on the preparation. Now, we have to break this down into two different styles of podcasting. And there's someone here that I know that mentioned the storytelling podcast that they have, and there's some questions that came over about storytelling. Now, there's two styles of podcasting in my book that are out there. There is the traditional style of radio podcasting that happens all of the time, right? So there's the traditional style podcast radio, where you're doing it like this. You're interviewing a guest. You have whatever it takes to create something that's like radio, right? Then you have the other style, which is the backside of it, which is more storytelling. Now, that can include interviews from people, and it's very NPR style. It can be NPR style. It could be Marketplace style. If you ever listen to the Marketplace podcast, where they go out and they interview different guests and they incorporate it into their story, but the stories are edited a lot more, and the interviews are weaved into a lot more of the story. And so it was Nessia. That's who it was. Nessia, who was talking about the storytelling podcast. And I will give some tips about storytelling here shortly. But when it comes down to the preparation of the podcast, I will say this: traditional style is a lot more free flowing, and it's a lot easier when it comes down to producing better content and producing content. The preparation that goes into your traditional style radio is going to come in the form of doing your research on their guest or your topic. All right. And when I do research on my guest or my topic, what I am typically doing is I'm going through, and of course, going through their website. Now, this is what goes in my mind. This is like really kind of, I'm sharing with you what happens in my mind when it comes down to the preparation process. So let's say, for instance, that I was going to be interviewing George. He's the Pocono Outdoors guy who I think is still here. And he he's going to be coming on my podcast, let's say in the next week. I don't know. And eventually I do want to get George on the podcast. But in my mind, if I'm going to talk about, learn more about George, where I will dive into the preparation process is, of course, getting a notepad and a pen, but I would be going into his website if he has something listed on his website. Okay, so this is the biggest thing. And I know it seems very basic, but the philosophy behind it really will make sense, I hope, as I continue to describe it. So I would go on his website and I would go to his About section on his particular page, or his About section on his website. And I would probably end up pulling that About section, or depending on the situation, I would pull the information from there, learn a little bit more about him. But then I would also go on his website and I would learn what he has to offer on his website, because these are all pieces of content that I can incorporate into my podcast. And it's not to say that I would be using it to fill time. I would be using it because it generates conversation. So you have done this so many times in your own life. When you have a conversation, you're at the bar, you're at your Pilates class, whatever it may be, and you have a conversation, and maybe you have learned a little bit about someone, based off of a previous encounter. Maybe you go check out their social media web pages and you see what they have to offer in terms of content. And now, when I say what they have to offer in content, I'm talking about, like, are they humorous? Do they provide a lot of jokes on their Facebook page? And I would write a lot of that stuff down in my notepad. I would say, oh, you had a Facebook post that I read the other day where you were talking about, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then that opens up the door to a whole new set of questions that you might have out there. So let me turn this off real quick. Sorry about that, for my Twitter to be going off. So that's one way I would do that. All right. You would do a lot of research. This will make for a better and more ice-breaking podcast. All right. Now let's talk about the storytelling side of it all. Now, when we think about storytelling podcast, the preparation that goes into that is a lot more hefty. I've created my own storytelling podcast, Be the Experience, which is in the Apple Podcast Store right now. And the preparation that goes into that is it dives deeper into, I guess you could say, the research behind your topic. So in this case, and the example of my particular podcast, Be the Experience, it was a personal development podcast. It was really more along the lines of the I guess you could say, trying to level yourself up and getting people to a place where they can become the best version of themselves over time. All right. And as I was going through this process personally, in the storytelling process, I had to go through and I had to research things on depression. I had to research things on medications that people may be taking, but I also had to research on maybe perhaps basic functions of psychology. And those basic functions of psychology allowed me to really formulate the story a little more and understand and be a little more transparent in my story when I would tell the story itself. So I would particularly have one interview. And so let's take, for example, my friend Jason Richardson. He's a psychologist and he was a former BMX rider back in his day. And he was a gold medalist and all this. And so when I interviewed him, I wanted to talk about the winning mindset with him. And how do you get to that winning mindset if you are trying to become the best version of yourselves? And no better way to have someone tell you about that is than getting it from the horse's mouth, right? So number one, I would do my research on Jason, and then we would conduct an interview. That would be number two. We would conduct the interview, and then I would go down this line of questioning based off of the research that I had for Jason and based off of some of the stuff that he has posted and based off of maybe some of his own core and personal beliefs, right? So then after the interview, I would go ahead and take those pieces of audio and I would go through and I would comb through it in Adobe Audition, and I would create time codes. I would go into and create time codes of the best pieces that were in those particular that particular podcast. All right. Then I would take those particular pieces of that podcast and I would say, okay, how can I formulate a story out of that as the podcast host? How can I help the listener discover what is going on in my head based off the conversation that is going on there? All right. Now, this really is something that ties together, like everything ties together all together. So when I'm asking questions in the interview with Jason, I have to also remember that I should be, and it's number 2 on my list right now, I have to be listening with intent. I have to be listening with the curious mind. I wrote an article for Radio Inc. magazine. I did an interview with them on a podcast a few weeks ago, but I was asked just this last week to write an article. And they said that one of the questions they asked was, what is the one thing that radio does really well that podcasters don't have? And I said, they listen. They listen really well because radio broadcasters are very, very curious about the next step. So in your mind as a podcaster, instead of focusing on the question that is immediate, what I would want you to do, and of course, this is number 3 on my list, it is learn to multitask. You have to be a great multitasker in order to get the questions that you want answered. All right. So like I said, this is all going to be something that is going to be happening all at the same time. It happens like boom, 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 all at the same time. And you'll see it happen when I get this software working and I'm able to broadcast and bring people in on Skype calls. You'll be able to see my mind working, and you'll be able to see me writing stuff down, and you'll be able to see that I'm trying to listen with intent at the same time. So a lot of the times, if a guest is speaking with me, I am at the same time writing very brief notes down because there may have been something that they talked about that had to deal and related with children. And that topic has somehow asked the question in my mind, well, if he has children, how does his behavior and his beliefs affect his children? And what does he expect his children to achieve with his own personal beliefs? You see what I'm saying? So everything is going to be affecting everyone else. So number 1, to become a better podcast host, you have to do your research in order to ask the right questions, but you have to be listening with intent. Not all of the questions that you will be coming up with when you go into that preparation and that research phase, not all of your questions are going to be answered. So what I would recommend that you do is you come up with a solid 10 questions to ask your guest. These would be pre-written, and you don't have to ask all of them all at once, because what I want you to rely on doing is I want you to rely on being a curious human. I want you to rely on being a human that can take the conversation down the road in an area in which has never been discovered before. Likely the person that you may have been communicating with has done other podcasts, and they may have answered the same question over and over. Have you ever done that? You listen to a podcast, and then in that podcast, you're like, oh, this is great. This is all amazing information. Then you follow them around to another podcast, and it's the same questions that are being asked. And then you're like, oh, well, okay, the same questions were asked in that podcast. Great, fine, whatever. And then you go to the third podcast that they're on, and then they answer the same question. I don't want you to be that type of podcaster who was asking the same questions as everyone else. I want you to go deeper into the human itself, or deeper into the topic itself, and learn about the philosophies behind the person and why they fish that way, or why they create stories that way, or why they create content a certain way. I want you to be more curious about the human. You can ask canned questions all day long, but the more curious that you are and how you drive that conversation to your end goal, which may mean that you have an ultimate question you want to ask, but you want to take the listener down the journey of the mindset or the process of that particular guest. The same can be said when it comes down to a storytelling process. You have to be thinking ahead of what is the next step that you want the listener to discover or to be enlightened about. So I want you to think about that. A lot of what radio and podcasting is about thinking about 5 steps ahead of the game so that you know what your outcome of your listener is going to be. So that's what I want you to start thinking about. I do it on this particular live feed itself. I do it in the content that I'm creating. So remember that you're creating content that may seem on the face like it's very like, oh, wow, they're going to ask this question, but you already have 4 or 5 steps ahead in which you want to divulge in your podcast based off of the current question. All right. So this is where the preparation all comes into play. I hope that makes sense. All right. Now, here's the other thing to become a better podcaster. I know there's a lot of you out there that have certain equipment. I know you may have the Zoom H5 recorder, H6, I think is what it is. Also, you may have a mixing board. There are also people who are using Anchor, which I do not recommend that you use Anchor. This week alone, I had 7 people come to me on my YouTube channel and say, I wish I would have not used Anchor, because now I'm back in a situation where I've created all this content and it, like, how do I get this off here? Because it's not giving me the freedom that I want. So, I'm having to go in and on those YouTube posts and tell them, like, you're going to have to go in and move the feed over. So again, don't use Anchor. And that is not something that I recommend that you do. But if you're using certain equipment, all right, and you're trying to get the best sound quality, and maybe your guest is not getting maybe they're not getting in front of the microphone. You'll get this a lot whenever you get guests who get in front of the microphone. They talk at a distance like this. They're afraid of the microphone. Most people are afraid of the microphone. And you always have to constantly be telling them, get in front of the microphone, get in front of the microphone. So the next step is to be a better sound engineer for yourself. I use the Yamaha MG10X-U mixing board, and I'm always mixing in real time based on what is happening. This is what I do in radio. This is what I do at home. You have to learn to become a better multitasker when you're asking questions, whenever you're mixing sound, when you're thinking of the next question. All of this happens all at once, over and over and over. So if you have canned questions and the canned questions are there while you're multitasking and they answer the question, you're listening still with intent. And then let's say that you missed something, all right? You missed something that they said, and you're like, oh, shoot, I wanted to ask them that question. You can always say, as a way of kind of filling a little bit of that gap, you can say, that's very, very interesting. Then you can use the keyword terms. These key terms right here, this is the biggest thing that I think you can do as a podcaster to transition the topic. Since you already know your questions that are canned, that are written out for you, you can say, I want to switch gears and ask you this question because, and then you know what the basis of that question is going to be. So instead of having that awkward silence that you would have to edit out, you can instead transition as a host by saying, I want to switch gears by asking you a question. And maybe the question is a little more off. Maybe it was a question that's like, you have a list of 10 questions. Maybe you're asking question number 8 that has something that does not even relate to the answer that person had given you. You can always say, let me switch gears, and I want to discover, or I want to dive into the areas of, let's say content marketing. You mentioned a lot here about YouTube Live, but let's talk about content marketing, because I think that is something that is really important for our audience to really dive into, because it ties into each other. So then you go in and then you ask your question. You know what I'm saying? So that's what you would do. So let's see here. I see Andy Lyons just popped in, so it's good to see you. April Innes, it's good to see her popping in. You looks like you and Andy are very close. I think. So that is cool to see Andy bringing people on in here. Okay, and then I have my last tip here that I have a device that you can refer to for information. So with all of this information that I'm sharing with you, knowing that you are going to have to multitask on so many different levels, and to become a better podcast host, you're going to have to not only do research, preparation ahead of time, but that research continues on through the process of podcasting. So this is where my next step, or my next tip would be have a device or have a second screen where you can access the internet and look up particular topics. I've seen this on the Joe Rogan podcast. I see it at the radio station every single day. And a lot of podcasters get very uptight about what their podcast is going to sound like. And when someone is answering a question, so let's say you've asked the question to your guest, all right, and your question is something that they're talking about at length. And let's say they bring up the topic of meditation and yoga, and it's a particular type of meditation and yoga. And you're like, oh, gosh, I'm really curious. And they start going at length. You can certainly go into your extra screen and do a research or a keyword search and start reading and skimming some of that text. And then maybe they bring up a particular keyword term, and then you're reading it. You can definitely interject into the conversation and say, oh, yeah, I see here on Google, it says that this particular type of yoga helps alleviate back pain or whatever. Is that what you have experienced? Or can you teach people that particular topic? So I have no problem with you as a podcaster interjecting in the conversation, as long as the question is relevant to the answer that they are already giving. I hope that helps out. All right. So, so that's something that I think is really great. Now, I do have written down here a couple of things that I wanted to break out on my list here, and it's something that is a little more off the side, okay? And it's when you go in and you start your interview and you've done all this preparation, you're learning to listen with intent. You're mixing live sound at the same time. You're going to learn that all this stuff just is kind of automatic after a while. The more that you do, it all becomes automatic. You're going to be listening. You're going to be mixing live sound. You're going to be researching in real time. You're going to be looking at your questions. It's all going to happen all at the same time. We as humans are very capable of doing these types of things. All right. Now, one thing that I think is a really cool thing that you do when you start your podcast out, and this allows you to break the ice with the guests that you have. But when I'm talking about this method of breaking ice, we're not breaking ice with the guest or maybe with whoever is going to be on the podcast interview. You're breaking ice with the listener. You have to always remember that your listener is the person that is going to be the one that is going to be consuming. The listener experience is always way different than the broadcaster experience. This was something that came up yesterday at the radio station. So I've been doing days for the past 2 weeks also. So I've had no AC for 2 weeks. And then, you would think, oh, I'm going to be doing days, a different shift. And then, of course, the AC goes out. So it was never like a really good, it wasn't a good transition week for me. But this topic had come up yesterday about having an icebreaker or having the listener become a little more acquainted with you. And when we talk about icebreakers, I'm asking you as a podcaster in the very beginning of your podcast is to break the ice with your guest. This icebreaker could be anywhere between 2 to 5 minutes if you want. So if you just joined me or you're here in this particular live feed, you saw that I was talking about my air conditioning problems and how, I had to deal with all of that. Most people don't want to hear rambling. They want to get right into the content, right? So we want to get right into the content immediately. But if we give a little bit more context and we say, today we're going to be talking about how to become a better podcaster. But before we get into that, I just have to tell you that the last 2 weeks have been very, very challenging for me. The air conditioning went out and I had the guy come out and I had to pay $800 initially, but it ended up being $1,100. You can break the ice. You can do the exact same thing with your guest. Get personal with your guest because the ice that is being broken is on the listener's end. So as I mentioned, we had this topic of discussion yesterday at the radio station. I was telling them how the listeners who, whenever they communicate with me online, I've got this group over at Facebook, they communicate with me online because I'm able to break ice with them on the air. I'm able to use the same type of language or lingo with them on the air. So my language and my lingo that I use on my YouTube lives and my voice and how my voice is on all of my other channels where it's a little more professional, it's different than it is on the radio station. So when I go live on the radio station, I break the ice, whether it's with a guest or with my listener themselves by saying, I'll be like 98 KUPD, or I'll say the Big Red Radio 98 KUPD. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Ashan Man, hanging out all the way up until 2:00. And bro, I gotta tell you right now, dude, the Slipknot show is going to be off the chain in the next couple of weeks. And are you ready to go to that show? Because I am ready to go to that show. If you've not gotten your tickets, make sure you head to our website, 98kupd.com, and that will give you all of the information of how to get your tickets for Slipknot and for Podcast Movement. I would love to go to Podcast Movement, but it would give you all your tickets for Slipknot and, of course, give you all the information of all the other shows that are coming through town. And you'll see that Alice in Chains is going to be coming through town, one of my favorite bands. So I know that, if you've been listening to them for years, they put on a really great show. So you see what I'm saying? I'm trying to connect with my listener a little more by using the tone that is more towards that audience. So the tone that I'm using more with this audience is more in that professional tone. All right. So I want you to break the ice with your guest as well. All right. I want you to warm them up for the listener and always learn about their history because someone's history affects what they are doing right now in their podcast, their business, their I don't know, maybe their venture. It doesn't matter what it is. Ask the questions, get deep. And if they just happen to be in the middle of the interview, you can ask those questions in the middle of the interview as well. You say, well, you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that, that you and your wife had gone through a very tumultuous time. And I'm wondering, did that time in yours and your wife's tumultuous time, was that the direct effect of how you are today and the success of how you see your business and your marriage? So you see what I'm saying? You can ask those questions and harken back to previous questions that may have been asked in the warm-up session or the warm-up area where you've broken the ice for the guest, but also for your listeners. So I hope that makes sense. So those are really kind of my tips that I wanted to share with you on becoming a better podcast. So there's certainly a lot more that I can go through. And if you're struggling with that, I can certainly help you out. I do want to get people in more on more of a community base where I don't have all these technical issues and problems with softwares and whatnot. So with that being said, I'm going to open it up to questions for all of you guys. If you have a question about what I have talked about today, or you can ask any questions that relate to podcasting, and I will hopefully be able to answer them. You can ask them on the chat right here, but what I would recommend that you do is that you go down in the description of this particular video, and there is a link that should take you on over to the question page, and I should be able to see those questions pop up over here on this end, and I would be able to answer those questions just for you. So I do see that we have quite a few questions that have come through, and that is great. So I want to thank you guys so much for asking these questions. Let me do a quick format of the Excel spreadsheet so that I can read the entire question. So I'm going to go through the comments here, the comment section, because I saw Andy Lyon popping in, and I saw a lot of other people popping in as well. April Innes, she says, so happy to see you too, Andy. Appreciate you for introducing me to Shannon and his informative content. So again, April, thank you so much for coming on in. Ryan Medina, my boy, is here. It's good to see you here, my friend. Thank you so much for joining. I'm late, but I have been busy soaking up knowledge. Thank you. I'm glad that you have been soaking up knowledge. Christian Bowler, thank you for some great advice. You're very welcome. Barrett Soup started a new podcast in my city. It's community-based. It's a community-based podcast called Made in Monrovia. Everyone wants on board. The question, I want to monetize it. I do ads, sponsorships, or ask guests to pay? So let's start right there with the monetization question. And if you want the question to come through so that I can guarantee that I see it, I will see over here on the screen right now. So the link down in the description below should be able to allow you to submit that question. I'll answer as best as I can. All right. So let's start with Barrett's first question. All right. Let me get a drink of water. That's another tip as a podcaster. Because you're doing a live talk format, you ever notice, and you should notice this, if you talk at length at times, your mouth gets dry, right? Your mouth gets really, really dry. And it sounds normal before the person takes the drink. And then when you take the drink, your voice sounds all of a sudden more clear. So don't be afraid to take a sip of water while someone is in the middle of their answer. Sip water and, get all that crap out of your mouth and make sure that you come off a little more clean. So it's always good to have a little bit more water and just kind of wet the whistle. Okay, thank you. So let's answer that question, Barrett. So you want to monetize your podcast. Do you do ads, sponsorships, or ask guests to pay? All right. There are a number of ways that you can monetize your podcast. And this is actually part of an article that I have written for Radio Ink magazine that's coming out in August. And the biggest question is, where do I monetize? What am I going to monetize? So Barrett, I want you to start extending yourself as a human, as a podcaster, as a person who is looking to open opportunities at every turn. All right. And the greatest, I think, analogy that we can look at when it comes down to this is the memes that you see or the inspirational posts you see online where they say, does a shark get afraid and is it afraid to take action? No, it's a shark. It's going out. It's eating stuff. It's acting like a shark. It's going and taking executing on opportunities in front of them in order to survive. All right. So when we relate this back to your monetization model, do you do sponsorships? Yes. If you have the audience. What I wrote in that article for Radio Ink magazine was I said, you have to start with the content first. Start with the content first on your podcast and develop and create better content for people to listen to. When we create better content for people to listen to, they want to come back. And then when you create even more content that they want to listen to, they recommend and they keep coming back. So they recommend it to their friends and they keep coming back. So they keep coming back and they say, oh, well, I listened to this particular rock and roll podcast and they share so many amazing tips on the history of the Rolling Stones and Black Sabbath and whatever. And like, there were just things that I never knew. Like, you got to check out this podcast. And they'll say, you got to check out this podcast. They'll share it on social media. So it all starts with the content. So build the content first, because as you build the content out, you're going to start seeing a spike in your downloads. And we're not even a spike in your downloads. You're going to start seeing a growth in your downloads. All right. And the growth in your downloads will be a great determination as to whether or not you can charge a sponsorship. Now, let's say you're only getting 80 downloads a week. All right. That's a lot. That's really slow for a beginning podcast. All right. Should you incorporate ads? I wouldn't incorporate ads, but I would incorporate listening behavior. Now, what do I mean by listening behavior? When I talk about listening behavior, I create in my particular podcast, whether mainly in mine, and I've recommended this to other podcasters' clients. All right. I said, you need to create a behavior based on how they listen. You guys have likely heard this. Every now and again, I'll listen to the David Axelrod podcast just because I want to hear how he is incorporating listening behavior. And he will have ads and sponsorships in his particular podcast, but they're so abrupt. All right. They're so abrupt. And an abrupt podcast, really, it's just kind of, it jars the mind. All right. And there's the philosophy of saying, like, you could do it that way, or you can really lead people into creating a sponsorship at a particular time in the podcast. So what I'm saying is that when you create a sponsorship inside the podcast itself, you have to develop the behavior. So the behavior would be, you're going to place a piece of audio in the podcast that is always going to be at the same spot that will train the listener to know, like, oh, there's always going to be something in that spot. In the beginning, what I would recommend is that you create some type of branding that plugs directly into that. So when you go in and you create the podcast, you will be training your listener to know that there's something that is there. They can fast forward if they want, but they can also later down the line discover that you now have a sponsorship that is in that particular place. All right. I describe all of this in my particular ebook on the monetization model on the 6 clever ways to monetize a podcast, which the link is down in the description of this particular video if you want to check it out. So I would, yes, monetize as sponsorships, do ads as ads. Sponsorships also can mean that it's something that is outside the radio. There's something called endorsements. So you can also have endorsements for your podcast. I describe all of that inside of the ebook as well. And it tells you how, like, I have done endorsements. So like, I've done endorsements for, let me think here. Who have I done endorsements for? Well, there was an endorsement that I was going to do for a phone company. I won't say which phone company, but I did an endorsement for a phone company. And it basically, the endorsement was something that I had to mention on the radio every night at a particular time by saying, I've been with this service for a certain amount of years, and they've done nothing but treated me well, blah, 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 blah. So you're basically endorsing the product that you believe in. And in that case, it was my phone. And I do believe in that. And I still have the same phone and the same service. So that's something that you could do. Endorsements can be something that you are really into. So for instance, someone was looking for an endorsement with me for a juice company, like a juicing company. And they know that I'm very much into the healthy eating, whenever I'm in the summertime, I love to have my juices. And they said, would you like to do an endorsement where we'll pay you $150 a week to mention why you use the product? So you can do an endorsement like that. All right. So that's one way you can do it. Or you can ask guests to pay. Now you can do the whole donation model, and the donation model will work well. What I would recommend that you do is that you start setting up those lines of income for yourself, whether you're starting a PayPal donation account. PayPal is okay, but not everyone wants to donate to PayPal. You can do something like, say, on Patreon. Just understand that when you're doing something on Patreon, that they will be taking a cut of your funds in order to keep the Patreon website running. So just know that you can do that. Now, when we talk about membership sites for your podcast, you can use any membership site that you want. Honestly, you really can. All right. You can use the one that is free, that is on Patreon, but they're going to be taking a cut of your particular funds. All right. So, if you're getting $1,000, every month, or $2,000 every month based off of contributions off of Patreon. But really the $1,000 that you're making is they're taking a small percentage. So maybe it's like $950 or maybe it's $800 a month that you're actually getting. You can either say that's okay because they do all the hosting, or you can go with a website builder like Kajabi. And Kajabi will allow you to create a subscription-based podcast. Now, you can say, well, you can come in and contribute if you wish. It's up to you. Kajabi allows you to create something called a ghost product. And a ghost product basically says, it's not something that is like, that you would consume. Maybe it's just something that, it's like donating $10, it's donating $20. You can have different tiers, and it makes it a little more simple. Now, anyone can donate any type of denomination, right? But if you want to be a little more organized and you want to have people in on what they would call your funnel, then that would be something that's more important, because you now have a customer. You now have someone who is willing to provide a contribution to you. And if you continue to pump out good content, then they would be more likely to continue to contribute as well. All right. The ghost products inside of Kajabi allow you to do something that is rolling monthly, where it's just charging their account, and it hits their account every month, where you get their $5 every month. All right. And until they decide that they want to unsubscribe. So that's something to think about. Kajabi is a wonderful platform, but if you're more on the I'm starting out and I need something like Patreon and the functionalities, it's going to be based on your philosophy of how you monetize. But again, I will recommend utilizing that ebook that's in the link description down below. That will allow you to learn a lot more, and the philosophies of why I do monetization a certain way. All right. So that's a great question. Thank you so much for that. I see Andy shared a link here. So let's show that. Let's go to an Excel spreadsheet question that we have here. And this is from Not a Mama's podcast. Let's see here. It's good to see you. So let's see here. It says opening greeting. Heard your interview with Addie the podcast planner, which is a video that is on my YouTube channel. So if you haven't watched that, go over there and watch that. She says, opening greeting. Heard your interview with Addie podcast planner. How to greet listeners more personally. You suggested using you. I need more information, examples, techniques. Thanks as always. So as I mentioned in this particular YouTube live, I mentioned that when you talk with your listener, you always want to refer to them as you, like one person, like you're talking to one person. So you see me looking in the camera right now, I say you. The reason why I say that you have to say you and refer to the listener as you is because it makes whatever behavioral psychology thing that goes on in their headphones, they feel more connected to you as well as the podcaster. So when you start saying you, knowing that you're broadcasting to a wide swath of people, they know you're talking to a wide swath of people. But when you refer to the listener as you, it makes it more personal. And this is what gets people to start consuming a little bit differently. It's very behavioral how radio and podcasting are. People think, oh, you're just talking in the microphone. But no, the words that you use and how you use them, that is very much intentional in how we create that. So if I were to just say, you guys, hey, you guys, what's going on? It's good to see you. Now, you've heard me say you guys at times, but when I am inside of the chat, I see all of you. I'm understanding the situation in which I am in right now. So I see there's a number of you guys in here, right? There's a number of you guys in here, but I could also say there's a number of you in here, but I'm also referring to the collective group, right? But when I go in and I transition, and I don't want the listener to really latch on to a topic that I am really passionate about, but I want them to be a little more tied to that topic, I will then refer to them as you. So as an example, let's say it's health and fitness right now. And let's say that you're having trouble with back pain, lower back pain. All right. And you can't figure out why you continue to have this lower back pain. You have sciatic issues. You've tried everything that you're doing in order to, you've done shots in the back. You don't know what it is. You can't figure it out. And let's say I was a fitness instructor, and I would say, as a fitness instructor for the last 20 years, I've learned and I've helped people get over the lower back pain. And most people want to use some type of steroid or to alleviate the pain. I don't know if steroids alleviate pain, but I think they do, or they get rid of certain things. But let's say, they have certain shots that are shot into their back and it alleviates that pain. But the pain is always coming back. What I will recommend to you as the person who is, you see what I'm saying? What I will recommend to you, I want to recommend to you that you start focusing on flexibility every single day. Focus on your flexibility and start working your back muscles and start working out the muscles in the lower back to where the muscles will support you just as much as the bones are supporting you. So I want you to think about doing something like yoga. I want you to think, you see what I'm saying? You want to transition to make sure that you're focusing directly on the person who has the pain point. You see what I'm saying? So I hope that helps out. I hope that is I hope that answer is sufficient enough, is what I'm trying to say. Let's jump to another question here. Let's see. What do we got? I have from Dwayne Hadley. It's good to see you. I'm looking for a free, simple editing software to help make my podcast audio sound more professional. Do you recommend one? Yes. So Audacity is the only one that is the free recommended one. Now, this will make it somewhat sound professional when you jump into the program itself. You have to go in and you have to set the equalization settings up. All right. It's free, but I believe that it's more hassle than what it is worth. Okay. It's a lot more hassle than what it is worth. But if you're just looking for something that is to record, but that's great. But if you wanted to make it sound professional, you're going to have to play with those settings inside of Audacity for the equalization and the normalization of your particular pieces of audio. Today, I wanted to show that on my screencast, but I got to figure that out. So maybe next week I do that for all of you guys in order to help you with that. So I will show you how I do it and how I make it more simple on me, because the process in free software can be a lot longer. Now, if you're just looking to record, you just use Audacity and it would be a wonderful program for you to just record. But if you want it to sound a little more professional and you want it to sound like it's more of a radio show, you're going to have to jump into something like, say, Adobe Audition. Just this last week, someone was asking me how I made my sound, how it made all my podcasts sound like they came off the radio. I say, it's Adobe Audition, and it's really just one thing that I am doing. It's one thing that I'm doing. And they're like, really? And I go, yeah. And so they're like, well, I'm going to test this out. So they went directly to the Adobe Creative Cloud, and they're like, oh, it's $20 a month for that software. Now, I would recommend that you get that, but you have to remember that if you're going to go in and get Adobe Audition for $20 a month, you should learn or know how to use it. And that's what my Design a Podcast training course is all about. I teach you how to use Adobe Audition. So it's not something where you get the program and then you say to yourself, oh, I don't know how to do any of this stuff. Like, that's what that program is all about. It's meant to make your podcast sound sonically better. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to go into the questions here I see or in the chat. Thank you guys so much for staying and being in the chat. I really appreciate it. I'll answer some questions here. Bearberg, I'll just get to some comments here. Bearberg, Slipknot is heading down my neck of the woods. London is going to be destroyed. Yes, dude, they're coming to town in the next couple of weeks. And in fact, let me see here. Yeah, I've got it right here. I've got my tickets for the Slipknot show. So I don't know if you can see that, but the Knot Fest. So I got my tickets for the show. So I'm going to be ready for the show when they come through town. Let me see here. I got to get this magnet on, right? What do we got? We have Not a Mama and Andy Lyons talking. Let's see. I never disappoint from Barrett Super. You're welcome. To Mark Crew, had to step away for a personal situation. Hope I didn't miss my question answered. No, I haven't answered your question quite yet. To Mark Crew, I'm going to get to it actually here in a second. All right. Let's see. He says, really need to help coming up with a format for my new podcast, Uncontrolled Chaos Podcast. All right. So we'll get to your question here shortly. Okay. So let me jump into it. The next question on the Excel spreadsheet here says, how can I develop a good interview and what platform is easier to use? I think it's just to use, because he put to use, I think, in there twice. So let me see here. How can I develop a good interview and what platform could be easier to use? Now, this is from Freddie. And Freddie, I don't know if you are here right now, but I would need to know what you mean by platform. If you're talking about a hosting platform, I would say that you would have to use either Libsyn, Blueberry, or Spreaker. So those are the two platforms if you're wanting to syndicate. Now, I think that's what you're talking about. Now, as far as the question of how can you develop a good interview, now that all goes back to the presentation that I gave in the first 30 minutes of this particular YouTube Live, is really more all along the lines of like, how do you become a person who's better at preparing for the podcast? How do I become a human who is better at listening a lot more? So when you develop a good interview, what I want to recommend that you do is you come up with 10 solid questions that you have. Like, let's just say there are questions that you just definitely want to ask that particular guest. Come up with 10 solid ones. And again, I'm going to say, write them down on a notepad. Use notepads. This is what we use in radio all the time. We are using paper all of the time. All right. Write it down and make sure you have it all written down. And when you're done answering that question, you can just check mark it, or maybe you have a highlighter next to you. Typically I have like just a pen, but I have in the past gotten a highlighter and I've highlighted the question to know that I have asked that question. Because what if I want to refer back to that question? I will have it still highlighted, knowing in my mind that I've asked the question, but maybe I want to dive deeper into that question, or they bring something up that will bring me back to that question. Okay. So that is a way to do that. I see Petra D is here. So it's good to see you, Petra D. I'm glad to see that you are hanging out. So that is how you would do that. Let's see, what platform could be easier to use. I'm going to say, to answer your question though, Freddie, when you're using Libsyn has all of the fields that will allow you to create the metadata for your podcast. So you know how a lot of the cool podcasts, the Cool Kid podcast, have a lot of the descriptions and it's how it's listed out and what category it's in and all that. Libsyn has all of that laid out for you all in their platform. Now, that's not to say that Blueberry doesn't or Spreaker doesn't. They do as well. But I just know that Libsyn is far more robust in terms of the metadata, and the metadata is what all counts for your search engine optimization for your podcast. All right. So that is something that I recommend people pushing it. I push them into it. I don't say get Libsyn because I have an affiliate code. I say get Libsyn because for the podcaster thinking long-term down the line for search engine optimization, you want those fields so that you can have more traffic coming back when people do a search inside of Apple Podcasts or any other syndication platform. All right. This is where the argument of people saying, oh, you should just use Anchor, it's easy to get the podcast up. Well, we have to remember that, yeah, you're putting metadata in there, but it's not as robust. So let's say you are a storytelling podcast, and as a storyteller podcast, you have seasons, right? As a podcaster who has seasons, you can officially in Apple Podcasts have have your show description say season 1, episode 1, season 2, and then it parses your seasons out. It'll just say season 1, and then it has all the episodes listed as season 1, and then you say you do it season 2, you do season 2, and then it has all of them parsed out into season 2. Libsyn gives you that ability to do that. Before in the past, if you did a seasonal podcast, you would have to write it out in the description of the title of the podcast and would say S1, E1, focusing on the romantic parts of your relationship with your wife, S1, E2, how to find more romance in the bedroom with your husband. S1, E3. You see what I'm saying? That's how you had to do it before. But now with the metadata fields in Libsyn, you can now have that listed and you don't have to put S1, E1. You can just have the title of your podcast be fresh and clean. So I hope that helps out. So let's see. What do we got? April Innes says, I have to run, but thank you, Shannon. This was super. Take care, everyone. Okay, so it's good to see you, April. Thank you for showing up. I appreciate it. I'm going to answer a question from To Mark Crew. So let me see if I saw that in here. I think Uncontrolled Chaos Podcast. Let me look at that and I will be able to answer that question. Let me do the format text wrapping though, because it's I can't see what we got going on here. Okay, here we go. So this is from Uncontrolled. This is from let's see here. To Mark Crew, Uncontrolled Chaos. The question is, so I have created a name for a podcast, but can't figure out the format. The show will be called the Uncontrolled Chaos Podcast. Any suggestions? So my first question to you, I think your name is Mark. So I'm going to I'll refer to you as Mark, but if it's otherwise, I'll refer you as that name. My first question to you would be, what is your podcast all about? What do you want it to be about? If you don't know what it is about, then what are you good at doing? So when I think about a podcast called Uncontrolled Chaos, I'm curious to know, and certainly you don't have to take my word for it. This is just what I think, and I don't know what other people think, but you have to think in terms of what your listener is going to be consuming themselves. All right. Is the podcast going to be comedic in nature? Is the podcast going to be more informative in nature? Is the podcast going to be about, let's say the podcast is all about inbound marketing for your podcast, and it's called Uncontrolled Chaos. And I could come up with a podcast about this right now. But let's say we call it Uncontrolled Chaos, and it's about inbound marketing for your business. Well, I could say like, well, the podcast is called Uncontrolled Marketing or Uncontrolled Chaos because the funnel setup that I'm creating in my email marketing campaigns can look like chaos. And I want to be able to solve the problem for the people who have that type of funnel. All right. So if that was a podcast that was talking about email marketing and funnel building, I would be able to say, okay, this podcast is all about solving the problems that you as the business owner are facing when it comes down to the chaos that you have in your email marketing funnels and every other part of your business. Now, likely that's not what your podcast is about. All right. Maybe your particular podcast is more comedic in nature. All right. And maybe it takes on the form of more of a Joe Rogan style podcast, a Tiger Belly podcast. Maybe it's more along the lines of comedy itself. You have a guest that comes in and you go over the topic itself. So if it's more comedic in nature, then you want to focus on the comedy aspect of it. And if that's where you're going to be listing your podcast, focus on the comedy aspect of it. So in the chat, Mark, please tell me, like, what is it that you're trying to achieve with the podcast? That's the thing that we have to think and remember with our podcast. We have to figure out what we are achieving. What's the end goal or the end game of our podcast? Is the end game to solve problems for our listeners, or is the end game to entertain them with our humor and laughter? So we are either entertaining, or we are educating. It's one or the other. And when it comes up to the coming up with the topic itself, or how we should format the show, and what can we do, I would say if it's comedy based, you need to treat it as a comedy based podcast. Use great examples like Tom Segura, use Joe Rogan, maybe you're using Mark Maron as an example. Follow some of those formats in which they are asking their guest questions or how they are conducting the interview. It's okay to go and listen to other podcasts and take things from them, but I don't want you to become an imposter of those particular guests. I don't want you to get this thing, what they call imposter syndrome. And what imposter syndrome means is that you see one influencer or someone online and they do it. Let's say they're just like real game show and they're like, hey, what's going on, guys? Hey, I'm going to be talking all about today about how you can make $1,000 in 5 minutes just by joining and then let's say you go in and you start doing your own podcast and you start it's just an imposter syndrome. You don't want to do that. You don't want to be that type of person. Be you. That's the best way that you can sell your podcast, is by being you. So do it what you know the best. If you know how to build car engines and your podcast is all based on building car engines, be yourself and create a podcast all about the technicalities of how you created or how you help people solve problems with their cars. I hope that makes sense. Let's see. Let me get some more water here. Let's see. Strength Through Christ Ministries podcast radio. Got your PDF book, starting to look to monetizing. That is great. I'm so happy to see that. Strength Through Christ Ministries. I do believe the monetization model for, and I don't know what your podcast is about, and I don't know if you're dealing within maybe church functions and trying to monetize it that way. But I do know that those methods still work for your podcast. It just depends on how you want to get them in. When I talk about monetizing podcasts, you will see in that book that I talk a lot about email marketing. I talk a lot about getting people in. There was a question that I forget, I think it was from Barrett, in talking about the monetization model. When we talk about monetizing, we are trying to monetize at every turn. At every turn possible, so we can get them to buy into a sponsorship, maybe a group, maybe there's a product, maybe it's a digital product. It could be a number of things. So we're trying to get them somewhere in our universe and getting them to maybe even buy a low level, something that is a little more low level. And it could be $5. Maybe it's something that's $10. Maybe it's something that's $25. But later down the line, maybe you want something that's a little more. Maybe you want to get them to you want to monetize $25. Here's one thing about monetization that I want to let you know all about, that I think is the key thing, and that something I discovered more recently than anything else, was that there is such an abundance of people out there that are looking for answers to solve their problems. Okay. And that your solutions to those problems are so needed in the marketplace that it's almost as though people are every day are looking every single day. And it's just not, we're talking about a small group of people. There is a large group of people who all maybe have the same interests. So let's say like it's all about Christianity. Well, there's tons of people who are in different sects of Christianity, but let's say it's a certain sect of Christianity. Well, still there's a ton of people within that certain sect of Christianity that may not have been exposed to your particular pieces of content. That might be something that you're trying to get them in on your funnel. Maybe later down the line, way later down the line, you're using something like Facebook ads, YouTube ads, something like that. So that's just something to think about. Okay. Let's see. Bearberg, I'm going to go answer your question here in a second, but I want to come back to Mark Crew and his question. He says, for the Uncontrolled Chaos podcast, I'm battling if I want it to be entertaining by looking at the news or trending topics on Twitter. Now, this is a difficult question for me, or not a difficult question. This is something that I fight with a lot, because what you're talking about inside of what your podcast is about is you're talking about hacking the trend hacking is what it is. And you want to be able to talk about those topics that, are going to, be that day's topic. What you have to understand with trending topics inside of Twitter or anything that is trending inside of news is that it's always going to be something that trends once and then it goes away. Okay. It's nothing that is evergreen. It's something that will just go away. So let's say, for instance, Kim Kardashian, like the other day, I read some article where they were talking about her butt for some reason. And they were saying, like, how does she have this amazing butt? And she has claimed that the reason why her body figure looks the way it does is because of yoga or something like that. I think that's what it was. It was yoga, because I was looking something up on yoga. And then that article just happened to pop up. And it was like, oh, this is how Kim Kardashian's body looks. But more importantly, her butt. That was the thing that they were focused on. Right. And I was like, okay, whatever. But that news is only going to last for that certain amount of time and that news cycle. So that news cycle might only be 1 to 2 days and then it's gone. Now, you can always come back to it, because I have done comedy podcasts. I had a podcast many, many, many years ago when I was trying to figure out the podcasting game. And I thought, we're going to make it offensive. We're going to make it all about trending topics. We're going to make it all these things. Like, I was trying to be edgy, right? But I didn't learn the idea of podcasting and knowing that it is really built for more evergreen content. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't do something that is more trend hacking, all right, where you're just talking about specific trends. But let's take the example of Joe Rogan. There was an article that was, or I'm not sorry, there was a podcast with Joe Rogan where he was talking with James Hetfield. And there were some things about James Hetfield that I had never learned. Now, James Hetfield is the lead singer of Metallica. And they started getting into this discussion about bees and how James Hetfield harvests bees and how he makes his own honey. And Joe Rogan asked the question to James himself, and he says, so tell me a little bit more about this bee thing. He goes, so I don't understand how do bees come up with the honey? And from that point forward in that particular interview, James Hetfield says, oh yeah. He goes, well, there's always one bee that is like the scout, and the bee goes out into the field and it starts, discovering, a place where they can, build their nest or whatever. And then they bring the queen back. I don't know anything about bees. So this is something that I'm just kind of riffing off of. And then he just starts talking about how the bee keeps coming back and forth. In that sense, I learned something completely brand new, not only about bees, but about James Hetfield, because that's something that I never knew about him. I knew he was a hunter. I knew that he liked to go out and hunt for game, but I never knew that he was into the gardening and the beekeeping. So you see what I'm saying? So when you're doing something that's a little more trend hacking, it's going to be here and gone, and it's hard for you to gather that audience. But when you're doing something with a guest, it can be trendy, because at the time when Metallica did that interview with Joe Rogan, it was trendy, but it also involved something where we learned something new about James Hetfield. So I hope that makes sense. Okay. Let me see. I'm going to go with Bearberg. Bearberg says, I'm going into online courses. Which is better, Kajabi or Teachable? It's interesting that you asked this question, Bearberg, because yesterday Kajabi just dropped a thing for partners, people who are already Kajabi users. And they were talking about what Kajabi does. And this is let's put it this way. If you're looking to get into a website, and I may do a video on this and I may show you the back ends of Kajabi. I can't decide whether or not I'm going to do that yet. But when it comes down to websites, they broke it down to Teachable, WordPress, Infusionsoft, and there was another one. I can't remember. I forget which there was a bunch of them that they were talking about. And it wasn't to say that they were saying like we are bashing on these particular products, but what we were saying are here are the limitations that these products have. Here are the limitations that they have. There are some products that are just landing pages only, and that's all they do. And then there's some softwares that are only just for email marketing. And then there's some softwares that just are for courses. And this is very true. When you're using something like Teachable, it is just for courses. All right. It's just for courses. But when you're using something for, say for your podcast, where you want to get people in from your podcast into your course, you want to use something like Kajabi because Kajabi, it doubles, triples, quadruples as a website platform. It does a lot more than say a WordPress site. With WordPress, it's you're dealing with a lot of things like plugins and what the plugin capability and the philosophy behind the plugin can do with WordPress itself. So what you're relying on is the developer's plugin philosophy to match with what's going on over here on WordPress. But what you're also trying to rely on is the fact that that particular plugin will play nice with the other plugins in WordPress. And if you've ever had plugins on websites and you've had multiple, some crash, some break because of other plugins. So that's something that you have to really think about when it comes down to your website platform. Now, would I use Kajabi? Of course, I'm going to always tell you that you can use Kajabi. In fact, if you want to, I have a link here, and I can't remember if it will give you the percentage off on it. But let's see here. Let me see here. I'm going to put the link in the chat. Let me see. So here's the link to where you can go. That will give you, I think, I can't remember if it was 10% off, and you get a free trial of Kajabi when you go with that link. That is an affiliate link, so I will get a commission if you become a Kajabi user. But Kajabi does so much. It's an email marketing platform. It is a website builder. It is a webinar platform. It is also an automation software. It's a CRM. It's got so much involved in it. So I would recommend that you at least check out Kajabi because it does so much, and you won't have to be piecing everything together. The philosophy behind Kajabi is that you should have it all in one so that it makes the customer journey much easier. So as a podcaster, when we go in and we think about monetizing the podcast itself, what we are talking about inside of sponsorships is that we are trying to get people in on our funnel. So in a podcast, and you guys have seen this on my YouTube channel, you've seen in the videos that I've done this. In the very beginning of parts of my videos, I always say, hey guys, it's the Shaman. Thank you so much for joining me. Or what do I say? I forget how I say it. I say, hey, how's it going, guys? My name is Shan Hernandez, radio broadcaster, podcaster, and podcast producer. And today's video is brought to you by my essential equipment guide to starting a podcast. If you're looking to start that podcast and you don't know which equipment that you want to get, I recommend that you grab my essential equipment guide, which is in the description down below. Go ahead and click that link, and I'll shoot that guide on over to you. So let me tell you how my philosophy in my mind works in this case. So in my mind, I want to pull that person into my universe so that they are now acquainted with me. So I've now got this lead magnet. That's what they call it, is a lead magnet. So I got this lead magnet on my videos. The same can be done for you in your podcast. You have to create these lead magnets in your podcast. So let's just say, for example, and I'm going to use an example for Two Mark Crew. I'm going to say Uncontrolled Chaos Podcast, and I'm going to say, let's say I do a podcast that is entertainment based. All right. And let's say, let me think. I'm kind of riffing here. So let's say I want to say, who are the top 5 or the top 10 celebrities that have, I'm just formulating this here. Who are the top 10 celebrities who are working out naturally to become more buff? If you want to learn more about that, jump on over to my website. I will send you like a little PDF. I mean, this is kind of a really poor lead magnet, but you get the idea. You want to get someone in on your email marketing list. So that's what I recommend that you do, because once you do that, then they're now tied into your universe. They're tied into your everything that you are doing. Okay. So that's what I recommend that you do. All right. Let's see here. Do you think pro wrestling review podcast can work, or is it an oversaturated market? No, I don't think anything is an oversaturated market. It's all based on the philosophy of how you are presenting the content, because there's a million podcasts out there that are all about social media, and there's a million podcasts out there that are all about marketing. There's a million podcasts out there that are about music. It's all in the philosophy of how you decide that you want to present that information. And this all comes down to structure. This is all based in structure. So that's what I teach inside of my Design a Podcast training course. I think that link is in the description down below of this particular video. I talk about the basics of podcasting, and I walk you through not only developing the structure of the podcast, but I also show you the editing process that I'm utilizing in Adobe Audition, so that it makes it easier for you as the podcaster to record your podcast, edit it up fast, and then pump it out so that you have more time to do the research and the show prep for your podcast. And that means also developing the lines of income and the funnels that come into as your podcast. So that's something that I think is really important for podcasters. That's where I think most podcasters are missing the mark. They're missing the mark on structure, and they're missing the mark on developing an email list or some type of marketing funnel for them. That's why I recommend using Kajabi. You can use MailChimp, you can use all these things, but you're piecing everything together. And at the end of the day, when you're putting all those pieces together, you pay $20 for MailChimp. Then you have to pay $20 for, say, Zapier. Then you have to pay $20 for, or maybe it's $10. I don't know. At the end of the day, when you get the WordPress site, you get the Squarespace site, all of that stuff is going to cost so much money when you could have just gotten into Kajabi pretty much for the same price, if not cheaper. All right. And it does a lot more. So just think about those things. Think about how you want to see your podcast in the future to evolve. How do you want it to evolve in the future? Okay. Let's see. Thanks for being a podcast Jedi Master. You are welcome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Ryan Medina says, what I have learned is even if there are 100 podcasts on the subject, how many are still putting out fresh content? If 50 of them haven't put out a new podcast since 2015, they need fresh content. This is very true. Thank you for that comment, Ryan Medina. I really appreciate you sharing that inside of today's chat. You have to remember, like, let's put it this way. I do have a dead podcast in Apple Podcasts. It's my Be The Experience podcast. And that has not dropped a show in a long time, but it is there. It's existing for people to discover. But I get reviews every now and again. I don't think I got a review in a long time, though. But I get people who listen, because when I go in and I look at the stats, I see people have downloaded. And I don't know if they've listened, but I know they downloaded. But the key here is continuing to develop and push more content out than your competitors that are out there, because your competitors may not put a podcast out all of the time. What I always preach is the fact that you should be putting content out all the time. Now, I try to put out a piece of content almost every week. You guys know this. You know this about me. In fact, I've moved more into the live streaming aspect of all of this instead of the pre-recorded, but I have plans for that. And those are plans that I will share later on down the line. But I'm going to be utilizing this content for more content later on down the line, so that it allows me to be consistent with developing more content every week. All right. So I hope that makes sense. Also, when you think about this, and it's something that Ryan has just said in this particular live feed, he says, think about the other podcasts that aren't putting out podcasts, and think about the other podcasts that, if they're not putting out content, then that means you can fill the gap with your thoughts. And that's how someone else can come in. So there's this guy that I know, his name is Ryan. And Ryan is he's big into jujitsu, and he has one of the top jujitsu podcasts in Apple Podcasts itself. And he's got sponsorships. Like, let's put it this way. Ryan is the only one that is really talking more about jujitsu than everything else. Now, you could say that Jocko Willink and Echo Charles with the podcast, with their podcast, the Jocko podcast, they talk about jujitsu, but they talk about a lot more about the mental mindset, how to, that podcast is a little more free-flowing and open. They do book reviews, whatever. Ryan's podcast is just about jujitsu. That's all it is. Now, he may talk about the same thing over and over, but you have to remember he is releasing a podcast every week, and someone can go back and listen to previous episodes. But Ryan is also updating some of the new techniques. Maybe he's also talking about some of the different people that he's run into in his podcast, and those new episodes keep getting pumped out. Now, does Ryan take a break from podcasting? Yes, he does. But what Ryan also knows is that the more he pumps out content, the more the algorithm is favoring him to say this content is, or this podcaster is pumping out content. We're going to push it up a little further in the charts. All right. So Ryan is driving traffic to get people to listen to this podcast. All right. So that I hope helps out. Let's see. I need another drink of water. Sorry. Svien, I think is how you say your name. I apologize if I'm saying your name wrong. I apologize. Let's see here. Wow, it's almost 10 o'clock. I can't believe I've done this until 10 o'clock. I have to eat breakfast. Let's see here. So forgive me if I say your name wrong. Svein. I think Svein is how you say your name. Shannon, you have imposter syndrome all wrong. Imposter syndrome is not all about copying others. It's about feeling you doubting yourself and living in fear of what others will find out. That you really do not know what you're doing, and you should not be where you are or what you do in life. Copying others is just copying others. Well, from what I've understood from imposter syndrome, it is also that as well. But you can also feel as though you are copying others as well. So having that imposter syndrome, I believe, also falls into that category as well for what you're saying too. That is just another piece of imposter syndrome. So I believe the definition of imposter syndrome may vary between other people, but it still has the same concept, I believe, that goes into the same category. So we can doubt ourselves and we can doubt what we do, but we can also, when we doubt ourselves, we can start copying other people and how they do it. So I believe that imposter syndrome has a wide definition itself. So that's how I've heard imposter syndrome. This is where I've heard it in many online forums as well. All right. Almost missed this due to the time difference. Thank God. Hello from Dubai. Hi. From Dubai. It's good to see you. Yeah, no breakfast for me. I know. Let's see here. Using Kajabi for my podcast. If you do a video, would love to do and participate. Yes, I will probably end up doing something with Kajabi that will help you. That will help you learn more about that platform. I will say this with Kajabi. I will say this with Kajabi. You're going to spend the same exact money for using one service as opposed to multiple services. I said this before. Okay. I said this before. So Ryan Medina says, as a writer, imposter syndrome can definitely be what, if someone wrote this book. Let's see here. The thing you have to remember is that they aren't you and nobody can do what you do. Yes. I'm Svein. I'm certainly sure that maybe I do have it wrong. I don't know, and I'm happy to come back and say that I have it wrong. But this is how I've always heard imposter syndrome. So I'm not really going to disagree with you on the idea. I just know that in the areas in which I have worked in, that is how I have seen and heard of imposter syndrome. I currently work with a client that talks a lot about imposter syndrome and focuses mostly on helping our clients not have that type of syndrome. Again, we can disagree. We can agree to disagree on this, but that is how I have understood it. And this is how I've understood it for many years too. So, maybe it's something different for you. I understand that. All right. So, okay. So I'm going to answer one more question. Strength Through Christ asks, how did I set up the Google Forms to submit a question? So I probably do need to make a video on that. So maybe I'll do, a video on how I set up these Google Forms for you. Okay. That might be a very good video for you guys, because likely something with your podcast, you might want to get someone to come in and do like a Google Form itself. I'm going to answer one more question and then we will I will call it a wrap. Let's see here. From Strength Through Christ. Let's see. WordPress.org is free. Kajabi, you pay monthly. WordPress, you pay just for hosting, not program and hosting. If Kajabi with free like WordPress, I would try. or if Kajabi was free, you would try. So you get a 14-day free trial with Kajabi. So you can do that. Here, let me break down the differences between WordPress.org and WordPress hosting. All right, let's say WordPress hosting. All right. So with WordPress hosting, it's going to require you to go in and set up the WordPress site. You have to, number one, when you go in and you create a podcast website, you have to buy, number one, the domain name, right? So you got to buy the domain name, and then you have to go in and you have to set up the server to where it's going to be the domain name to point to that particular server when you get hosting. So you will do that. You will pay for hosting with a WordPress site. All right. Then on top of that, once you've gotten that all taken care of, then it's a matter of finding the theme. Then you got to go find a theme for a WordPress.com site. So you can go to ThemeForest. And so you're going to be paying for a theme over there. All right. So then you get the theme over there. And then the theme can cost anywhere between $20 to $80, depending on the type of theme that you want. Back in the day when I was on a WordPress site, there was a theme that was going around called the Genesis Framework theme or framework. And then you had to buy the theme on top of that. And the framework alone just cost $100. Then you had to buy the theme, which could have cost an additional $30. Now, I don't know what that is these days because I'm not even on a WordPress site anymore, but I do know that you have to buy the themes and you have to constantly be updating the themes. So that is the biggest hassle. So you're spending a lot more time doing the administrative stuff that you should be doing inside of WordPress that you should not be doing. You should be focusing on building your podcast or building your website and getting that moving forward. And so you're going to spend way more time trying to figure all the stuff out in the plugins and how the theme works. And if you don't know how to use WordPress, it can get confusing if in the beginning. If you know how to use it after using it for a while, it will become a lot better, a little easier for you to navigate. But then you're going to start realizing that you're going to have to be installing plugins, this plugin for that, that plugin for that. Now, when we talk about WordPress.org, it is free, but it doesn't give you the customization capabilities on a deeper level. All right. It's not going to give you that customization on that super deep level. Now, Kajabi is meant for people who are serious about their business and their podcast. That's what this is about. So if you're serious about your podcast and you want to monetize on the podcast, Kajabi has set that up all for you. So when you buy the domain name, the only thing that you have to do is plug the domain name into Kajabi and they'll handle the hosting. They'll do it all for you. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. It's not something that is going to take a lot of time. With WordPress, if you don't know how to go in, figure out the DNS entries and all that stuff that I don't really care to know. I don't want to know that because I'm going to just be doing it once, but I don't want to have to go in and constantly be looking at YouTube videos to figure out how to set it up. I would much rather use Kajabi because it's literally plugging your domain name and then they do the rest. It's easier that way. All right. The customizations on Kajabi may be a little bit different, but they are intended for you to grow your podcast, grow your business. That's why I use Kajabi, is because it allows me to say, all right, I have an email marketing program. I don't have to tie it to MailChimp and hope that the form on my WordPress site is going to take in the name and the email address. And so I'm not saying that it doesn't and that the plugins don't work, but we know that WordPress is constantly updating their platform. And so once they update the platform, every developer has to update their plugins. So we have to remember that as well. All right. Let's see here. Svein says, with self-hosted WordPress, you control everything. You do not have to buy a theme. There are thousands of themes out there that are free. I will agree with that. There are thousands of themes out there. But if you're trying to leverage and you're trying to move forward and trying to grow a business where it's got email marketing and it has numbers of if you're trying to leverage email marketing, membership sites, all that, Kajabi does that all for you. With a WordPress site, you're likely going to have to buy into someone else's plugin and that program, and it'll be on the back end of your WordPress site. You're more than welcome to do that, but you will run. I just have learned this by having a WordPress site. When I forget what it was. I think at the time I had Memberful, and I was trying to create a membership site on Memberful through WordPress, and it did not do what I wanted it to do. And then at that time, it had Stripe as the payment service. And that's the other thing Kajabi does. It integrates all of your payment services immediately into the platform itself. So you don't have to go into Stripe or PayPal or anything like that to have the checkout process be smooth. Kajabi does that all for you. When you're doing it with WordPress, I think, and I don't know because I haven't been on WordPress, I think you have to set that up manually from what I understand. Let's see. Andy Lyons, I'm going to create a separate URL and WordPress site for my podcast and add the drop-down menu for categories so listeners can go deeper into the industry specific startup founder interviews. That's a good idea. That's definitely a good idea. Let's see here. Let me see here. Hang on. I'm going to remove Svein because he's just coming in here and he's trying to give tips, and it looks like he was being kind of rude with me. And I was trying to be kind with him, but that's the thing. I'm just going to block him. He's being rude. I don't like that. He had some good tips, but of course he just wants, I'm not, you can come in, but I expect that the conversation that I have with you on these live feeds are constructive and not just dragging me down. And that's what I think. Here's a good tip. Here's a good tip when it comes down to people who are in on your live feeds. All right. And they are being like that. You have the option to either address number one or two, however many times that they are commenting. And number two, if they continue to just start just kind of, I don't know, I would say if this is the unofficial term, bashing you, then at that point, then I just block them. I just remove them because they're not adding to the conversation. They are just saying, well, you can do this and you can do this and you can do this. Well, you're not in my philosophy wheelhouse. So I recommend that you go somewhere else. And I just don't feel as though he was contributing the best way possible. So maybe you guys feel otherwise, but it was starting to get annoying because he started seeing all of his comments and I couldn't see what you guys were doing. Not a Mama says, many choices, make a choice that will grow with you. Make sure you understand what you create and control. Yes. Some business owners want one place for most functions. Yes, I think that's what most people want. Shanman or Ryan Medina says, you're a saint, Shanman. That was a masterclass on how to handle a troll. He was insane. Yeah, he was being rude. He was being a jerk. So I had this happen to me on a pod or on a live feed the other day. And the guy came in and he started making comments about my appearance. And he was saying like, he looks high and he looks like this. And I'm just like, I hope that you're joking because that's your number one warning. And if you are joking, let me know that you're joking so that I don't block you. And then he's like, F you. And then I was like, okay. And I just blocked him. I banned him from the page. So when you get something like that, just ban them. That's it. All right. Okay, guys, I'm going to go ahead and jump off. I want to thank those who did a super chat with me. They hit a super chat, that little button down below, and contributed some money for the support of this particular channel. So if you want to support this channel and donate a little bit of money to the channel and help out, you're more than welcome, but you're not obligated, certainly not obligated by doing that. But hit that super chat. And of course that will shoot some funds on over here to me and keep the channel moving along. We will answer one more question, I think, and then we will do. Let me answer one more question, and then we'll do. Let's hear, because Andy Lyons says anchor question. Before we go, anchor question. Arlen Hamilton is using Anchor for her new podcast, Your First Million. Would you please clarify why? And then it says at 7:20. Can you clarify why you're not recommending Anchor, even with their updated terms of service? I have a colleague who plans to use the platform. I personally am a huge fan of Spreaker. Okay, I'm going to answer this again. One more time. Anchor does not give you the control over the Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play accounts. So likely when you have started your podcast, let's say with Spreaker, you got an RSS feed and you had to get that RSS feed, and then you had to go to Apple Podcasts and you had to put that RSS feed into Apple Podcasts. You had to actually create an Apple Podcast account with your email that you're using for your iTunes account if you have one. All right. So then you do that. Then you have to go to Google Podcasts, which these days I think Google Podcasts, once you submit it, I forget there's another way. I have a video on it, but it shows you how to put Google Podcasts into like your smart device or whatever. But you have to submit that individual RSS feed to each and every one of those. All right. Now, let's say that you are unhappy with Spreaker, which I doubt you will be. But let's say you're unhappy with Spreaker and like, I'm just not getting the metadata that I want. I want to do more. I need to go to a different service, or maybe Spreaker's just not updating, or something's going on. Let's just say that you're just not happy with Spreaker, which I doubt you will be because they're a pretty good service. and you go, I'm going to go with Blueberry. Well, now you go start your podcast with Blueberry, and you're now doing everything over on Blueberry. Then what you need to do is you need to get that new RSS feed and go back into your Apple Podcast account and plug that new RSS feed in so that you don't have a lapse in episodes and you don't lose subscribers. Okay. With Anchor, when you start a podcast with Anchor, they will set the RSS feed up for you, and they will set up the Apple Podcast and the Stitcher Podcast and all those platforms for you, but you have no access to those accounts. So when you have no access to those accounts, and let's say you're unhappy with Anchor, which continues to happen with people, more and more people every day on my channel come to that Anchor video and they're just like, how do I get off Anchor? This thing has been a nightmare. It's not serving me the way I need it to serve me. How do I do that? And I've got like 200 episodes up there, and now am I going to lose all those episodes? Well, that's one of those things where I say you're going to have to go to a new hosting service and get them to migrate all of those episodes onto your new hosting service. But if you want to change the RSS feed that's on the Apple Podcast page, you can't change it. You cannot change it because you have no access to that account, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever. So that's why I recommend you do not go with Anchor. Now, maybe they've changed that, but last time I checked, they didn't change that. So that's why I don't want you recommending Anchor to people, because it's not a service right now that is going to serve the business owner or person who's looking to get more deep statistics. But, is that a thing, more deep statistics? It's just something that you want to have more control over in terms of the other accounts that are outside of Anchor. Okay. Let's see. Strength Through Christ Ministries podcast says Kajabi is a little pricey. Yes, it is expensive at what you see, but when it comes down to it, if you were to get MailChimp, if you were to get MailChimp, and you were to get all these plugins that add into your WordPress site that you want it to do, you're going to spend more money on those plugins and all of those services. And with Kajabi, it's all in one, so everything plays nicely together. So I would recommend doing more research on Kajabi for you, because it's going to make things a lot easier on you. I'm not selling you on this because I have the platform. I sell people on it because I hate wasting time. And there's one thing that we do not get back is time. I would prefer that you save the time and the headaches from having to tie everything together on a WordPress site in order to make your podcasting a priority. So that's why I promote Kajabi. All right. Okay, guys. So I'm going to go ahead and jump out of here. I just want to say hi real quick to the Digital Core. I'm sorry that I was not able to answer any of your questions if you had some, but I do want to thank you for jumping on in. And I want to thank all of you guys for being patient with me and learning. So I guess you're learning. I don't know if you've learned anything, but we will be working through this a lot more. Excuse me, I do plan on starting a community in some sense because of the issues that I have with the community section inside of YouTube itself. And within that community, I do plan on providing far more value in terms of the editing. And I probably will walk you through the processes that I am going through when it comes down to my own platforms themselves. So I give you guys a lot of the face value stuff, but I have not shown you the deeper parts of how I make these things work. So likely that community is something that I want you to come in and learn more about. I just haven't, with the AC problems, I haven't had a chance to develop that yet. All right. So hopefully we will be able to get that up and running for you guys here real soon. To Mark Crew, I'm going to go eat. Yes. I feel like pancakes today, but I've been eating like crap for the past couple of days. So I'm going to have to go just do a smoothie. So we'll have to do that. And let's see here. Ryan Medina, Andy Lyons, Pocono Outdoors guy. Thank you so much, George. I appreciate it. And just for you guys, so you know, when I get my software issue fixed, I'm going to be inviting George onto this particular YouTube live, and we will be talking a lot about his podcast, and we will get deeper into that. So I plan on doing that with him. So just kind of stand by. If you are not on my email list, make sure you get on the email list over at theshanman.com. If you've not gotten the essential equipment guide, I would recommend you go get that. And if you have not gotten the monetization guide, I recommend you go get that if you're getting serious about monetizing your podcast, because you basically get the philosophy of how I am thinking from the standpoint of the podcaster. You are going all in on podcasting. If you're going to go all in on podcasting, you got to go all in on your mindset. And that book talks a little bit about mindset, but it also talks about the processes. But let's put it this way also. I have also added an additional $1,300 into my bank account based off of some of those strategies that I'm using inside of that particular um, uh, book. So I'm not saying that because I'm like, oh, I made $1,300. I made it based off of something where I sat down for a good week and I implemented. And then once I was ready to release it, then that was the result. And so that we're talking about in 2 weeks' time. So it's something that I think that you can do, but it's something that I think you need to be first. You need to work the processes first before you get to that level. All right. So I want to be able to help you out. All right. So again, thank you guys so much. Stay tuned on the email marketing list. The links are all down in the description of this video. And I will help you as best as I can to get you moving and get serious about your podcasting. Thank you all so, so much. I really appreciate it. And I will see you next time. Stay tuned for the emails, because I'll let you know when I go live again. I wanted to try a Saturday and see how it works. Seems Saturdays work real easy because we have more time. So that works out really well. So in the meantime, thank you guys so much for watching, and hopefully we'll have the software issue fixed next time, and I will talk to you guys later. See ya.